It just kind of like settles in your gut, and you're just not ready to talk about it. But it builds tension in your body. Release language is the other way. When you get really angry and you start yelling, it actually releases a certain amount of energy. And we're in that period now relative to the economic. It'll continue getting worse as we progress into October 25. The happy talk will finally really fade by October 25, and we'll be into a very nasty period of time that will run from then until the November 2nd of 2010, so a little over a year. And we'll see dollar-related damage from November 4th of this year through to November 2nd of next year, and by then we think the dollar will be pretty much gone. That
by what date now?
November 2nd of 2010. So over the course of the year from November of this year until November of next year, the dollar is going to basically die. First, it'll start dying really effectively as a global currency. It's already in that process, and that'll accelerate. Then we're going to get some really nasty bumps in the road, so to speak, that will induce hyperinflation or hyperstagflation. I don't really know how to define this because there's two currents that are going to run out. There's going to be hyperinflation on everything you need, everything from food, medicine, fuel, anything that has calories associated with it. So, for instance, beer has calories, so it's going to be hyperinflated. Oil does, gasoline, even firewood. But those things you don't need, like big screen TVs, are just going to keep dropping in price because we're just going to have a glut of them, and people are not going to be buying them because of the hyperinflation. So there will be this deflationary component to the whole thing going on at the same time that we have hyperinflation.
But the hyperinflation will tie to things that people normally need for survival.
Correct. Food primary among them, because we're going to hit a huge food crisis that will even induce famine in the U.S. over this next year. The famine will contribute to the other economic problems, and it'll also contribute to the healthcare issues, and it'll also contribute to the political chaos that's going to erupt next year. The political chaos will be driven by the suffering in this year economically in the last 3 or 4 months, as more and more people become unemployed, and larger amounts of the corporate fascist structures start collapsing, and more people are released to their own devices. We're going to see a coagulation, we call it, of the federal government. And it's more of a withdrawal, kind of like the turtle pulling all of its little bits and pieces into the final protection of the shell. It's going to let go a lot of the subcontractors. There's going to be less government activity. And right now, government accounts for about 50% of all of the employment in the United States. So it'll be the last bastion, so to speak, there. The stimulus isn't going to work. It's going to get really ugly as the dollar starts losing its purchasing power. Foreign countries are not going to ship stuff to us. We won't be the consumer of last resort anymore. We won't have cheap goods available from anywhere. And we're going to have to be thrown into basically a world of economic hurt as the sins of the dollar come home to roost.
Exactly.
Now, it's not us that did it. It's not the ordinary individual person, but we've allowed ourselves to be taken over by this gigantic New World Order empire, or the powers that be, as we call them. And they're the ones that have caused the karmic debt to accrue to the dollar as they've gone out in our name and oppressed people around the planet for years, trying to get them to co-opt into this economic system. And it will come back in a very negative way. So we expect a fair amount of suffering from the uninformed, who are just, listening to the mainstream media and the green shoots and all of the, tied up in all of the political falderall about all of this and getting all whipped up about that and being misdirected. These people will be caught unawares. The 401ks, all of that kind of stuff that they've got an investment in, their houses as any kind of a storehouse of wealth, all of this is going to come crashing down around their ears. Realistically, it's happening now, but you'll see it very much more visible, even reported, although slanted, in the mainstream media from about the 25th of October on, as we get into some of these really major crises.
Well, I had Jim McCanny on a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about tent cities, springing up among unemployed and poor people outside L.A. So it's already happening.
It's going to get much worse.
Exactly. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about self-organizing collectives. Roger, JG, Kay, and Paul, thanks for your patience. We're going to open up the phone lines once again when we come back. Stay tuned, everybody. More with Clif after these messages. Tonight, we're joined by our special guest, Clif. Hi. Annie is there in the background somewhere. Hi, Annie. How are you? And there
I'm
you
here.
go.
I have a question eventually.
And we've got a full board of calls. And Cliff, we are going to hit the self-organizing collectives that you frequently talk about. But let's let some of these callers be a part of the show, which you can join at 1-800-313-9443. Roger, hi. You're on line 2 from Kentucky. What's on your mind?
Cliff, there are a number of intelligence communities out there, retired associations and whatnot, that would be open communications that would turn up in your analysis. Can you talk about any intelligence-related information you've developed, especially space-related?
Good question.
Boy, that's a huge area. I can talk about some of it. I'm reluctant to get into anything that would have a tendency to put individuals at risk just because of something that I might say. And so there's some information that we just basically ignore in a public forum simply because it may go towards an individual that doesn't need the extra publicity, so to speak. But we do see all kinds of, in fact, let me put it this way. Our collection within our data set that goes to space has grown consistently since 99, and around 2003 took off in a huge way, and that giant bump that occurred in 2003 caused me to have to relocate things within the lexicon just to accommodate the new data coming in around the space elements, and it has been superseded by stuff that's occurred this summer. We've got a huge bulge in the new data that I'm trying to sort out now, all of it going to space, but this is a very broad area. So, for instance, we're seeing a lot of language relative to the space component that's shading over into what we called alien wars, and it's showing up from NASA, of all places, about their attack on the moon, so to speak, in October as an instance. But there's other examples. But we even see it going over towards the contact meme with extra ETs, basically, of all forms. And then it even shades over and includes things like the shadow government and the powers that be. It's really a curious thing. If one were to get into the conspiracy business in a serious way and start looking at all the various conspiracy theories, and it does not matter where you start, you can start in on chemtrails or, deep underground bases or internment camps or anything, and you just get into research mode and you just start reading everything you can about this subject and following all the links. Eventually you keep running into the same wall everywhere, and this is the wall of the contact issue. Whether or not we've been effectively contacted by extraterrestrials of some form, and whether or not our government's working with them, did Roswell occur, all of this kind of stuff, because it goes back to the core of what's happening on the planet now. In other words, if any of that is true, then enough of it is true that we should be able to operate on some kind of free energy and not be polluting the planet with the burning of fossil fuel, but that instantly alters the entire balance of power and does away with a feudal system that has been in place since the 800s. It is an illusion to think that we've ever had a republic, at least in my lifetime, and that we've always, it seems to be a truism that we've always been controlled by this small group of elites that basically considers the planet very much like an old feudal state with themselves at the top. And they've been forcing us into certain things, while theoretically, or at least there's evidence to suggest that in the 50s and 60s, we started, as a species, some component of the U.S. and other governments started to get really active in space and not tell the rest of us. And then they put on this dog and pony show with NASA and all these rockets and stuff while having all the cool stuff in the background.
Well, Cliff, I can tell you, sometime we'll have this discussion off the air, Cliff, maybe even on the air in a later show, but I know firsthand, up close and personal, not with my experience, but with a relative, there is a secret space program out there now. What the connection is to what you're talking about, I really don't know. Roger, we got time for one quick follow-up.
Okay. Have you seen anything specific on a manned expedition in deep space to change the orbit of something coming in?
No. There's nothing in any of our data that suggests that any of the Planet X stuff in any way, shape, or form is close to reality. It all seems to fall and categorize itself into the disinfo. Doesn't mean it doesn't occur, but it does mean that at this point there's a huge amount of disinfo around it.
Okay, let's go to Kay. Thanks for your call, Roger. Let's go to Kay from Washington calling in on line 3. Hi, Kay. Do you have a quick question or comment for Cliff?
I do have a quick question. I understand that growing food and self-sufficiency is a good idea. I'm wondering what Cliff thinks about gold and silver.
I'd have some if I had money. I'm of the opinion right now that if people wanted to act and change things, all they have to do is take any paper dollars they've got, any form of paper dollar asset, and convert it over to metals. And we could effectively, if we got as little as 1/10 of 1% of the populace of the U.S. to do that, it would crash the system and bring down the political house of cards, do away with the Rothschild, Rockefeller banking interests, and totally alter the planet.
You know, Cliff, I'm writing an article right now for Freedom's Phoenix where I'm really advocating for that. I'm saying get your hair cut at Joe Barber Shop and not the corporate chain store.
Yeah.
Shop at Joe's hardware store, not Kmart, Walmart, or any of the other marts. Is that what you're talking about here?
I'm talking about essentially the same kind of thing as Catherine Austin Fitz does with her Solari groups.
Yes,
of having local, taking your money, making it local, and dealing with it in a realistic way. And the start of that is to get it out of anything that's owned by the central banking system.
Exactly.
I don't have enough money to make it an issue. So if I had money, I would buy gold and silver, believe me.
I agree. Because if you keep the money inside your community, and this is kind of, I think, what you're alluding to here in the self-organizing collectives, if you keep your money trading, bartering, or whatever vehicle of exchange you're going to use, you know, you stop the intermediaries like the Federal Reserve and these big banks and the international bankers from horning in, being the middleman and inflating the price of everything else.
Look at it another way. We're all giant rivers at this point. We take all of our wealth, lay it out, put it into their institutions, and allow them to charge us for doing that, and we provide power to them. Every single individual that says, I'm no longer going to participate and I'm removing myself from anything to do with their banking structure, it takes away power from them. And if you get enough people doing that, it'll collapse. In fact, it's collapsing of its own weight now, but it would certainly hurry it along a bit.
Well, we need to hurry it along. Kay, thanks for the call. Let's go to line 1. Hi, Paul's calling in from California. Do you have a question or a comment for Cliff?
Yes, I sure do for Cliff. Cliff, do you see anything inside the data or any type of language where we're going to have a cancellation due to economic or whatever of certain religious holidays such as Christmas or some of the type of holidays like Easter and so forth?
Sort of the reverse. No, we don't show anything that's going to be a big issue where the powers that be are going to make that an issue. But nonetheless, the consumer society is already in the process of crashing, and so Christmas won't be the same. And I think we actually stated that Christmas of 2007 would be the last quote normal Christmas season. This year, in terms of the consumer approach, it'll be abysmal. Next year, it probably won't exist at all because of the active phase of the American Revolution kicking off.
Well, maybe we'll actually get back to what Christmas really is.
No, unfortunately, we're going to go into a couple of years of real froth and chaos here. So starting really this November and through into 2011, I wouldn't expect life to resemble anything you've known in the past. And in fact, it may get quite strange here, especially in the U.S., because we're going to have to go through the same kind of chaos that the Soviet Union went through. Whether we choose as a collective to break up or not lies in our future, and we